Let's start with something simple. We'll collect the existing SSIDs from Meraki using the Dashboard API. Assuming you've seen the prerequisite courses, you're already familiar with how DevNet sandboxes work. This one is an always-on sandbox, which means we can access the Meraki API without any reservation. We can see the public API key, which, as we learned in the previous course, is long-lived and relatively insecure, especially when shared on the internet. Let's jump over to the shell. First, let's take a look at the Meraki helpers.py file because this is where most of the heavy lifting happens for the next few demos. The purpose of this Python module is to encourage code reuse by defining common functions. Sometimes we call this DRY, or don't repeat yourself. We begin by importing the requests library since we'll need HTTP client support. The first function is called findNetwork and takes 2 arguments. The organization string represents the organization to search for, and the network string represents the network name to search for within that organization. The function returns the network ID associated with that network. If we don't specify any parameters, both strings default to the word DevNet, but we can override those by passing in specific values. Inside the function, we first collect a list of organizations using the REQ function. Let's quickly explore how that function works. This helper function performs the actual HTTP request, sort of like a wrapper for the requests library except specific to the always-on Meraki sandbox. We must specify a resource but can optionally override the default method and JSON arguments. The function defines some local variables relating to the sandbox to keep things simple, including the API key provided by the sandbox page. Notice that I'm using requests.request here, not request.get or requests.post. This generic request function allows us to specify the HTTP method as an argument, improving modularity. If there are any problems, let's raise an error to halt the program. Otherwise, we should return the response, allowing the caller to manipulate the response object. Jumping back up, we now understand that orgs will be a list of organizations. We followed a similar process in a previous course, just with less optimized code. This next block of code iterates over all the organizations and searches for the organization name. If we find it, we save the value to org ID for use later. Assuming we found the corresponding ID for the organization we wanted, we have to issue another GET request to collect all the networks in that organization. Then, we iterate over the networks returned by that GET request, searching for the specific network in question. If we find it, we return the value and the loop terminates. If we didn't find the organization or network we were looking for, return none to indicate failure. After all that, we're finally able to check out our get_SSIDs.py script. The first thing we do is import our helper functions from the Meraki helpers module we just explored. Let's jump down to the main function. First, we use the findNetwork function with no arguments. That means we'll be searching for the DevNet network inside the DevNet organization. Once we find that network ID, we need to issue another request to grab the SSIDs in that specific network. Here's a documentation example that shows the proper URL for this GET request. Notice that we have to substitute the network ID into the request URL. As I often do, I've added some debugging code to reveal the JSON data that comes back from the API before we print it. Let's quickly explore an example of this output, which is in the JSON ref folder called get_SSIDs.json. This is a list of dictionaries, and each dictionary represents an SSID. The number at the top is the SSID identifier, and all the other keys represent data about the SSID. Jumping to the bottom, we can see there are 15 total SSIDs, 0 through 14. Take note of that enabled key because in the next clip, we'll be modifying it. To keep things pretty, I use a simple loop to iterate over each dictionary and print out some summary information about each SSID. This is pretty basic stuff, so I won't detail all of it. Let's run the script by typing python get_SSIDs.py. As expected, we have 15 total SSIDs numbered 0 through 14. I've used the numbers 0 and 1 to represent disabled and enabled respectively. Let's see if we can enable SSID number 14 in the next clip.